Welcome to the Shiva Life podcast. So today I'm talking to Stefanos Sifandos. Score. He is a trained educator and relationship expert with a background in behavioral science. He's passionate about leading people closer to the highest potential and to each other. He helps men and women escape negative patterns and cultivate a positive sense of self, as well as restructuring and reframing their relationships, things that matter most to them, with themselves and their loved ones. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
My honor and pleasure. Thank you.
I want to know, first of all, I want to know your journey and how you chose this path that you're on, how it started. And what I personally want to know the most is, how do you know so much about women's psychology? It's unbelievable.
Well, I don't know if I know that much about female psychology or the feminine psychology. However, I'm a keen observer of human nature and interaction. And I do like to reflect very diligently on the things that I do and the way that I show up and learn from that, because I often make a lot of mistakes.
We all
and
do.
I fail a lot.
Yeah.
Which I'm not terribly against. It's just it can be painful sometimes. But my MO, if you like, is to really focus on the learning and the growth opportunities that comes with the choices that I make. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I have to place the learning and the growth opportunities on hold to actually feel the discomfort that I may experience as a result of some of the choices I make. But to answer your original question around how I am where I am and why I'm so fascinated with human potential and human psychology and relationships, and really primarily the relationship to the things that are most important to us, whether it's our intense or traumatic experiences, our visions for the future, our intimate romantic partnerships, our sexuality, our personalities, like all of that. Yeah. To me, if we can evolve those relationships and more, of course, we are really doing something special on this planet. Mm. And so from a very young age, I was fascinated with people, primarily because I grew up in a very violent, volatile, uncertain, traumatic, if you like, very intense environment.
You mentioned childhood trauma, actually. I think I read that somewhere, and I wanted to ask that about it.
Yeah, just my father was very physically abusive and emotionally intense, and my mother was very much the same as well, and they were constantly fighting. It was just a very unpredictable environment for a little boy, right? For a little kid, full stop. And so because of that, there was this void of intimacy and connection and trust that was missing. And so naturally as adults, I've heard Dr. John Demartini say this, if you know who he is. He's been in the personal transformation space for many years. I heard him say once, our greatest voids become our greatest values. And so for me, it was natural that I wanted to understand people and I wanted to help people, and I wanted to help myself.
So you lacked that, you're saying, between you and your family, say, or your parents?
Just growing up, full stop. I lacked that, full stop. Mm-hmm. And as an adult, I crave that. I crave to be seen, which we all do, right? We all crave to be seen.
Validated, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so we'll either validate ourselves through healthy channels and healthy means, or like most of us, we seek validation through external means and external feedback, but in unhealthy ways, where we're very attached to how someone treats us or how society reflects back to us, and then what we make that mean, and how we then layer our own worthiness and value on top of that. So in other words, if I perceive that people don't like me, and I make that mean that I'm bad or I'm not good or I'm not enough.
Not good enough, yeah.
I'll have to compensate through my actions that comes from a wounded place.
Yeah.
And so now I'm going to be someone that I really don't want to be. I'm going to wear masks. I'm going to maybe be a people pleaser.
Yeah.
I'm going to overgive, but it's not coming from a generous, kind, loving, authentic place. It's coming from a place of, I need you to like me, or I'm going to be domineering. I'm going to control. I'm going to coerce. I'm going to be oppressive, because that is going to give me a sense of, oh, I've got control. And so there's all these different ways that we do that, that we seek control and we seek to be validated.
And it starts from the childhood, the way you're treated, and the way when you feel like you're not good enough and you keep wanting to try better, to do better. And I can relate to that.
And what we make it mean, because, the interesting thing about trauma or intense experiences It's less about the experience itself and more about what our nervous systems and our psychology make it mean, and then how that affects us, and they form beliefs about the world around us, our worldviews, but also about ourselves.
So how did you get to this point to realize, like, what was the turning point, and how did you start healing yourself? Like, what was the journey in that?
Yeah. Well, there were many turning points. I rarely think it's one catalyst or one turning point. It was a cascade effect, right?
Yeah.
However, you could say that there was a turning point that was big enough for me to make change, right? And so the negative cycles of action that I was caught in and that I was creating for myself, and it was self-perpetuating, needed to be broken, and they could only be broken through positive cycles of action, but not without creating spaciousness in my being, in my body. And so, you know, I don't know if I quote unquote healed myself. I got to a place where I just couldn't go on with the lies anymore. You know, I was in a relationship many years ago, and that partner found out that I was cheating, and there was a lot of infidelity, and it was extreme. It wasn't, not that, look, any infidelity can be extreme, because remember, it's with trauma or intensity, it's how we perceive it. It's less, it's and how we interpret it and what we make it mean, less about the action itself. But there was just this addiction and compulsion towards that, seeking that external validation, and also not addressing the wounds around my freedom, and the wounds around intimacy, and the wounds around partnership that I was playing out constantly over and over again. You know, one of the things that we do really well as adults is we attract in our adult partnerships first what we need to learn and grow through, but they're often reflections, consciously and unconsciously, of our parents or our primary caregivers. So what we did and did not receive from them.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that playing out as well. And when she found out, there's a lot of shame that came to me because of what I had done. And for the first time in my life, I'd really been, after that point, and it took me a minute, I got honest with her and I said, okay, these are the things that I've been doing while we've been in our relationship. And coming face to face with those actions and not running from them anymore, it really opened me up. And also I started remembering a lot of my suppressed trauma as well. So there was that to deal with. And then that's where I sought other people to support me. I sought therapists and counselors and spiritual guides. Oh, absolutely. There was a lot of the journey that I did by myself, sure.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of the journey that I did with other people. Like I allowed people to really support me in that and see me.
Your upbringing impacts your adulthood in relationships. Sometimes you meet someone, and there's so many people that grow up, it's not their fault, you don't choose your family, but you can come from because of the circumstances, a dysfunctional family, you know, someone grew up without a father, without a mother, and then you could meet someone who had the perfect postcard family, and they're still together, and they could fall in love and try to decide to be together. What do you think could clash? Like, what do you think some of the issues could be between those two people coming from extremely different lifestyle? You know, like I personally grew up with a single mother because my dad wasn't in my life for 15 years. And I think seeing my mom and her strength as a single mom, it made me who I am, you know? So what do you think some of the issues could be that a couple may face who come from extremely different family dynamic?
Yeah. So in the example that you gave, where someone comes from a safe and generally happy household, and relatively steady and known, versus someone coming from a very volatile household.
Yeah.
Again, you know, the individual that comes from a happy, healthy, safe household can still have issues of relating. They can develop patterns of relating that aren't necessarily healthy as well. We can get to that in a moment. But often what you'll see is, if they do happen to come together, and that person that has had a very, what on the surface looks like a traumatic, intense childhood, if it's unresolved and unprocessed trauma, it's going to play out. It's going to be self-sabotage. It's going to be abrasiveness, loudness, potentially shut down, reactivity, and that person's going to be in shock. Now, if that person the other person that's come from a safe environment, say, right? A more certain environment, if that person is connected to their own sense of self and they carry a higher level of self-worth, then they will not tolerate that, and they'll put limits in place, and they'll say, because boundaries are internal and psychological. Limits are what we place externally. They'll say, this behavior doesn't work for me. These are some solutions that we can move through. I love you. I care for you. I want to be with you, but I won't tolerate this. The unhealthy person is going to maybe cower or people please, or the unhealthy person is going to make it their fault, and then they're going to adjust to that person, and they're going to be caught in this trauma bond and this trauma cycle. And then it's, for both, absolutely. Yeah. So it really depends on the individuals, and are they healthy in their constitution? Meaning, have they actually moved through some of the suppressed and repressed stuff that they've been hiding from or running from? And that will determine how they behave and show up in relationship. Because that person that's had a very traumatic childhood, if they've really dealt with that at a core level, then chances are they're not going to bring that in relationship. And if they do, they're open enough and willing enough to actually work through it, take ownership of it, apologize, seek support, whatever the
And you have to
outcomes
know
are.
how to work through it, right? You have to learn
That's
to
practice.
a point where,
Yeah. That's the practice of self-awareness, of self-discovery, of self-learning, of self-love. Like that's the journey of self-love, where you value yourself enough to say, I am not going to tolerate this behavior just coming out of me reactively. Now, one of the ways as well is to know each other's pain, past, history, trauma, understand each other's patterns of behavior. So, if you and I are in a relationship, like a friendship, whatever it may be, and you're behaving or I'm behaving a particular way, it would pay for you to understand, empathize, be compassionate and curious. I wonder where that behavior is coming from, because it feels a little extreme.
right.
Because if you can come from that place, now you're not being reactive, which is fueling my reactivity, which then fuels your reactivity and so forth.
Yeah.
Now you're able to calm the situation down. So again, it comes back to, are you doing your own inner work?
Yeah. Self-awareness is definitely key, but I do, that's the main, I think for me anyways, the first thing.
It's a starting point.
It's a starting point to be aware, even if there's something and you're like, why am I doing this? But I think it's also very important for the other person to be able to understand and comprehend, because you can communicate all you want, but if the other person is not willing to actually try to have empathy and understand where you're coming from, even if he or she has no clue what your experiences were like, your traumatic experience, because they've never been through it, but still try to empathize. I think that's a key point too, isn't it? To try to, at their own level.
Correct. And that's the connection piece, right? And so that's where you want to understand your partners, your friends, your family members. You want to understand their journey, their path. When we do, and we're actively being curious and proactive about that person's life, we're showing that we care. I'm not saying make excuses for their behavior. I'm saying understand them in a deeper way so that you can be less reactive. And if there's less reactivity in the dynamic, there's less of a compound effect of negative cycles of action. Another thing that's really important as well in relationship is David Hawkins's work on the map of consciousness. Willingness becomes the catalyst for constructive action in the world, for constructive states of being, for expanding one's own consciousness and one's own self. We have to be willing to have difficult conversations. We have to be willing to look at the parts of ourselves that we've negated, that we don't like, that we shame, that we judge.
And you just keep pushing it down.
If we keep doing that, we're going to get more compensation that comes out through our behavior. The greater the pain that we experience in life often means the greater the pleasure required to mitigate the pain. Meaning we'll seek pleasure, usually in unhealthy, extreme ways, to combat the thing we don't want to look at within ourselves. And we'll project and we'll blame others. That's not healthy in relationship.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. So how are you so good with women's psychology?
No,
You didn't answer.
I don't know if I can answer. I think sometimes I fail terribly.
It's that video. I mean, I'm gonna play that clip because, and again, not everyone. Obviously, everyone's different. But I just remember seeing this. I think I shared it, and it was so on point.
Why do intelligent women, or so many of them, remain single or prefer to be single? It's a great question. And when we're dealing with any person that's intelligent, they know themselves. They've done a deeper level of work on themselves. They have learned to love themselves. They a better boundary. In other words, they are going to own their nose. When someone unhealthy or toxic enters their life, they're not going to lean into them and say, yes, how can I please you? How can I help you? How can I support you? How can I maximize your needs and minimize mine? They have done a level level of self-work on themselves. They are self-sufficient. They are less reliant on men. They aren't going to tolerate bullshit. They aren't going to tolerate games. As a result of that, they're not choosing the same kind of partnership over and over again and wondering, why is this happening? They've made the unconscious patterns and trauma in their lives conscious. They've actually equilibrated and worked with their trauma. And that really is, I mean, intelligence is a very layered conversation and a very layered concept. But when we're talking about relational intelligence and emotional intelligence in relationship, it is vested and grounded in self-love. It is vested and grounded in moving beyond the patterns of the past that have been survival patterns and into patterns of thriving. These intelligent women, and this is what I admire so much about them, are not only curious about their own lives, but they're not willing to settle. So they are happy to be single and they can find and create joy in their world outside of needing partnership. So partnership becomes a desire and a healthy partnership becomes a priority.
I resonated with it so much. There's no point in me having a partner unless that partner is contributing, adding some kind of value. And I'm not saying give me something. It's just that if we're merging, it's positive. You know, if they're draining my energy in any way, then it's like, why? I'm doing just fine by myself.
Yeah.
You know?
You realize your worth and your value, and you don't want to settle.
Yeah.
You don't want to compromise your value, essentially. That's a byproduct of you knowing yourself, exploring yourself, loving yourself enough, also knowing what your values are, what your requirements are in relationship, and what your requests would be in relationships. And they would vary a little bit. Your requirements won't vary too much, but your requests will vary depending on the personality of the other person and your dynamic. But knowing what your non-negotiables are, like that. But again, that's a byproduct of I care about myself enough to spend time on this thing.
And it takes time to get there.
And effort.
Yeah.
But I mean, you look at your own
Self-awareness again.
big time, but it's more than just that. You look at your own career. You don't have to go into detail, but you look at your own career. You know your career better than anyone else.
Yeah.
From when you started, whether you were, this big or that, it doesn't matter. But the years that you've been in your career, when you go back to the inception point of making the decision to be an actress or to entertain or to be in this art craft to where you are now, think about the effort, the time, the energy, the focus, the learning, the setbacks, the hardships, the resilience that was required to move through the difficulty. Like, think about all of that. Now, we all want great relationships, but are we willing to put that level of effort in? Some people are not. It's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
Some people are not.
No, it's true because you're right. You put effort into exactly all those things, and then sometimes you feel like the relationship should just be the peace.
Should.
Yeah, it should just come easy. Not that, of course, you want it to be peaceful, but it still takes work and effort.
Friction's okay. A little bit of friction's good. That's how we make fire. A little bit of friction. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
You get warm by friction.
But sometimes you hear, like I've heard, like, I just want this part to be the peaceful part. Well, it's not. Are you thinking about yourself too? Like, are you bringing peace as well? It takes two. So sometimes it's hard when it's one-sided, and sometimes like, oh, this part, I won't be with someone, and I don't agree with this. I won't be with someone unless they're just bringing me peace. They shouldn't have to bring you anything. Like, I feel like that whole thing is just wrong to say,
Very well said. And if we don't deal with the war
that's
inside,
already expectation.
big time, right?
Yeah, from someone else.
And expectations are rigid.
Yeah.
They're contracted, and they're vested usually in fear. And that's a sympathetic nervous system response.
Yeah.
So now we're on high alert. We're in survival. And if we don't deal with the war inside, we look for peace outside of ourselves. So now we project that peace onto the other person. You've got to make me happy. Codependence.
Yeah.
That's what it is. It's codependence, essentially. I don't even have to go to a second or third or fourth point.
Yeah.
And that level of unhealthy codependence, it dictates our lives. And if that person doesn't give me peace, then I'm never going to be at peace. But when you take care of the war inside and you feel peacefulness here inside, you'll bring that to relationship, and you will ask for nothing less. In other words, you will also call forward your partner or potential partner to be at that level of mastery, willingness, consciousness that you're at as well. And again, you won't settle.
That's one of the elements of actually a healthy relationship, I think.
Agreed.
Right? If
Yeah,
you're
interdependence, not codependence.
Right. Okay. And here I am getting sidetracked again.
I wouldn't call it sidetracking. It's all relative.
I wanted to ask you about, you have this really cool, you have some programs and workshops.
Yeah.
What's the inner child workshop. Okay, how much can you talk about it?
Of course, yeah, as much as you like. Yeah. So there's a level 1 and level 2. Level
And
2
you have
is
the Queen workshop and the Conscious Man. I want to know about all three.
Of course, yeah, yeah. So the inner child workshops are level 1, level 2. They're taught live, and you can also learn at your own pace, but they're best taught live. And it's a combination of somatic work and developmental psychology and inner child exploration. Like really, adults can be deceiving because we look at each other and we see adults. Right. We
Right.
see big people.
Yeah.
But ultimately, for the vast majority of people, and I'll put my hand up for this,
Right inside
it's
you.
exactly right. Yes. And it's the little child that is the one that's obnoxious, is the one that's scared, is the one that's controlling, is the one that's manipulative, is the one that's judgmental. And I don't mean that in a negative way.
Right.
It's these unhealed aspects of ourselves. And again, I want to be clear. I'm not stating that everyone is unhealed. It's more of a remembering or a lack of remembering. We've forgotten who we really are at our core. And again, many of us, not all of us, but we come from intense childhoods. And so developmental psychology tells us that, what we experience during our childhood in our formative years shapes who we become as adults, our personalities, our afflictions, our values, how we give and receive love. And so it's important to reconcile that pain that we experience. And so these inner child workshops are an opportunity to connect to the healthy parts of ourselves, but also to connect to the parts of ourselves that we've had trouble with, that we've maybe been in disconnection with, and to learn to apply love, compassion, and empathy to those parts as well, because then we start
of
feeling,
you.
yes, then we start feeling whole, and then we don't bring those unconsciously into a projected relationship.
Yeah.
And that's
Because
powerful.
that empathy that I always talk about applies to yourself too, doesn't it? Sometimes
First and
I
foremost.
even tend to forget that. It's like I always say people should have empathy towards each other and try to understand everyone has a different journey and everyone comes from a different background. But at the same time, you need to also, I guess, have that for yourself and for all the mistakes. I don't even call them mistakes. The lessons, the experiences you've had, and forgive yourself and just move on, right? So, and have that empathy towards yourself too. That's important.
Yeah. And, sometimes I've found, in some of the work that I've done, and even with myself, we're really good as humans at holding on to guilt, because we have almost like this fantasy that if we can be more in our guilt, more in our fear, more in our, repenting, that God will forgive us, or the universe will forgive us, or our sins will be absolved, right? And it's this almost immature way of looking at the nature of things, or the reality of things, because at that level, it's all benevolent. It's all beautiful. It's all purity of love. There is no need for us to be in guilt and shame in order to feel redeemed. But we often do that, and we carry on that victim mentality because we want someone else to save us. That's where the drama triangle comes in of savior or hero, victim or villain or perpetrator. And we place ourselves in this victim role so that we can find a savior outside of ourselves, and we can blame someone for our problems, the
It's a lot
villain.
in today's society.
Yeah.
It's happening everywhere in the world.
Yeah. Yes. Painfully.
The other one was the Queen workshop. So
Be the queen.
Be the Queen.
Queen, yeah.
That's focused on the women, obviously.
Yeah. So these, both Inner Child and Be the Queen, my wife Christine and I, we run those programs, and we've been doing it for a number of years, and they're beautiful programs. Be the Queen is very specifically for women, more so that are single, that are looking to be in relationship.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But the focus is it's a 3-month, 3.5 month, 4-month immersive. The focus is really inner
person.
work. Virtual, yeah. And then there is an in-person component at the end as like a graduation. It's a beautiful ceremony.
Wow.
We bring special guests. It's really powerful.
Wow.
It's really powerful. The ceremony itself, the day-long ceremony, if that's all you did, that would be, it's really special.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously have a bias, but
So
anyway.
that's mainly for women who are looking for love.
Correct. And wanting to and sort of at a place in their life saying, okay, cool, I'm the common denominator in my life. I'm not blaming myself, I'm not hating myself, but I want to make some changes.
Yeah.
So I can start to attract a new kind of man, not the same kind of man, but just with a different face. I want to create different patterns of relating. And so we go deep into what that looks like.
So that's the inner work that you're talking about, basically. I see.
Yeah.
So is that the same with the conscious man? Is that the similar idea with men?
Yeah, yeah, that's more open to if you're in a relationship or not. That's really more for a man to tap into his sense of masculinity, create that for himself, and be more stable in his personhood. But ultimately, that's all about inner work. It's all about exploring the unknown, unseen, shadow parts of self.
Yeah.
In a male container. Yeah.
Do you believe you can thrive more as a couple these days rather than individual, or vice versa?
Yes and no. So here's my take on that. I very much believe that. I'll tell you a story instead. So a number of years ago, I'm going to answer it through the story. I promise. I'll come back to the answer. A number of years ago, I was at a crossroads in my life. This is before I met my current wife, and I've been in this state since. And this is like the masculine dream, right? Like to disappear into freedom and expansiveness, and go to the mountains and just be a monk and be with nature. And there are many men, and the masculine energetic often craves something like that, right?
Yeah.
So from a very young age, because I was exposed to yogic traditions and
you're spiritual.
yeah, I mean, I was exposed to that from a very young age, through my mum as well, and alternative spirituality, not just the Greek orthodoxy that I grew up in, but beyond that as well, from a very young age, like when I was a few years old. So I've always been fascinated with that aspect of things. And I was at a crossroads and I thought, do I just drop everything and just literally go to the mountains of Tibet or northern India and just see what happens?
By yourself?
Yeah, and just disappear from the world, just drop it and go.
This is before you were married? Or
Yeah, for sure. And then I thought to myself...
Self-discovery.
Yeah. And I've done things like that in the past where I'd disappear for a number of months and I'd go trek around the world and be by myself. But this was more of a permanent, I'm going to disappear for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. I don't know. Whatever. I was going to leave the world, so to speak. Not kill myself, but leave the world. Leave the world that I was accustomed to.
Right.
And I sat with that for a number of months, and I really sat with the reality of what could an intimate relationship give me in terms of growth and evolution. Right?
I've asked myself that question.
Yeah. And then I thought to myself, I never wanted children. I was averse to it. This like hard no. And it wasn't until, again, after doing deeper inner work, that I became open to having children. Again, before I met my wife, like it wasn't, but it's a very recent phenomenon for me.
Yeah.
Most of my life, I was very much against that.
I can relate to that too, yeah.
Because of what I witnessed, you know, and what I did not witness as well, you know, which is what I needed, or what I thought and felt I needed. And I realized that there is if growth and expansion is one of my greatest values, can I be of this world, make an impact, at least in my life, support other people in their journeys, and learn and grow through the trials and tribulations and beauty of being in an intimate relationship. And I arrived at a place where I said, like, yeah, I can do that. And that is a real thing. So to answer your question directly, it's yes and no. It depends on the individual. Depends on where you are in your life.
In your journey.
Yeah, in your journey. Depends what your dharma is, what your soul signature has come to this planet with.
Yeah.
Like but is there great value? You know, they say that, you know, ayahuasca or other plant medicines are the truth tellers of our world.
Yeah.
Have a child. I've done a fair amount of plant medicine.
I've been wanting to, actually. I'm interested. I feel like
it's deeply opening. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
We talk more to that as well. Yeah. But there are many different types of medicine journeys that open you to deep revelations.
That V is not a plant, by the way. It's wings.
It's wings.
But
I
it could be plants now that we're talking.
Okay, absolutely could. Yeah, for sure. You're going to tell me, look, I like symbolism, as you can tell. So I want to know more about that.
Yeah.
But to the point is, there are many medicine journeys that open up our hearts, right?
Yeah.
Having children, being in committed intimate relationships, or just being in relationships, like intimacy, right? Being vulnerable and real with yourself, pursuing your highest goals and dreams and so forth. Yeah. Disappearing into austerity, and there are so many different ways to the top of the mountain, basically.
The reason is because if you ask, and not all, but most older generations, like even my parents or my friends' parents, they always say 2 is better than 1. And I didn't agree with that. And it's not that I disagree with it, but I'm just like, Not necessarily. I think it really depends. Because for me, maybe it's because of my life experiences. When I was younger, especially, I always flourished when I was on my own. And every decision that I've made so far, I mean, I'm not married and I don't have kids. Every decision I made so far by myself, it's been by myself, basically. So I think sometimes I have a hard time seeing the two. I feel like sometimes two might slow you down. You know, I always had this sort of mental, but then I realized it depends on who you're with. If you have a partnership and whether they limit you or they're actually spreading your wings even more,
Yeah,
right?
supporting you, yeah.
And supporting you. I felt like every past relationship that I was in was limiting me and was just trying to actually close my wings and just put me in a cell and your mind, basically.
You, if you don't mind me saying, you also witnessed your mother really being by herself for a fair amount of time as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah, so part of your values and even part of, and also you have a lived experience of creating success and joy and happiness and accomplishment in your life being by yourself.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it can be maybe scary, or you're apprehensive, or you're just not sure of what it would look like to be, like you said, two instead of one.
Yeah.
And I can see how you have a thought around, oh, well, two may slow me down. I've been doing pretty good so far.
And I see that in a lot of successful women or independent women. Sometimes they, or men too, I'm sure, they sort of have this fear of splitting that, or sharing it and having the two keep moving forward instead of the one. You know, there's that little fear, and I can't deny it. I still have it too. I think everyone goes through it.
Yeah, I think it's seasonal too, right? Like you'll go through different seasons of your life in terms of your values, your beliefs, your outlook on the world, even your connection to yourself. The question you not need to sit with, but it could be helpful if you sat with this question is, what does the next evolution phase expression of me look like? Is it better suited to be in partnership? Is that what I truly desire? And the parts of me that are saying no to that, is it coming from a healthy, genuine, connected place, or is it coming from a place of fear and contraction? And that's not a thing you have to answer right now. It's a, I call it a walking meditation. Like, eat with it, go to the bathroom with it, walk with it, dance with it, be in your work with it. Just let it permeate, be in the question of that, and observe what you feel viscerally, but also the thoughts that come up as you ask that question or a similar question.
So before this turns into a therapy session for Shiva,
Okay. I hear that.
how many times we've heard the honeymoon phase is over.
Yeah.
Oh, I wish we could continue the honeymoon phase. Do you think there's a way to even maintain that? I feel like there's different stages of love, right?
Yeah, there are different stages of love, and there's meant to be different stages of love and intimacy and relating. And the honeymoon phase is it's an extreme expression or a more intense expression or connection of novelty and variety. And as we get more exposed to something,
There's a little more love bomb in there, isn't there? I know you posted a video about that.
in unhealthy expressions there can be, of course. In manipulative, in pathological relating, there can be that love bombing as well, which essentially comes from a place of fear, of unworthiness, and control, wanting to control. Because and again, the control comes from fear of being seen, or fear of losing someone, or fear of being abandoned again, or whatever the wound may be.
How much do you think intimacy and sexual attraction plays a role in the success of a relationship? Because that's also, I feel like that's a part of the honeymoon phase, and a lot of people say it doesn't last, and you get serious. And
it's where effort comes in. Like, you've got to put effort into the next phases of relating.
Yeah.
I can break that down that why as well. So to answer your original question, sexuality and intimacy play a critical part, generally speaking, a very important part in relationship. And, there's a lot of nuance there with respect to the partners and their agreements around that as well. But generally speaking, levels of intimacy, meaningful levels of intimacy and sexual attraction and connection are important parts of any relationship. Oh, not any relationship, sorry, any romantic partnership, I should say. In terms of how do we continue to relate to each other in exciting and meaningful ways as the honeymoon period wanes, as the way our physiology and hormones are interacting with each other, as that dies down. Because what then often happens is it opens us up to a less polarized version of ourselves, meaning when we meet each other, we generally put the best foot forward. As we get more comfortable with each other, that best foot comes back a little bit.
And how much more comfortable should you get?
That's a good question.
My next question.
So again, what do you agree with? So I know couples that have been together like 20 years and they, I mean, pardon what I'm about to say here, but they haven't even farted in front of each other.
Haven't or
Have not.
Okay.
And they've been together for 2 decades, 3
I like
decades.
that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like it's an agreement. You know, it's an agreement. You know, like if we're getting real for a moment.
Yeah.
So because for them, there's a level of
First
mystery.
part, it's the end of the honeymoon phase. Like,
Done.
oh, that's it.
We're
it's
done.
over.
We're complete. And honeymoon phases, they last from a few weeks to a few years sometimes.
Yep.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on so many different variables.
That's true.
But in as it starts to wane, you now see a more whole version of the person. And that can be very confronting for people because when you see that whole version of the person, it activates something in you. It reflects something back to you about yourself. And we don't like that. We don't like to see that.
I see.
And
Interesting.
because it reminds us of something. So then we'll start having judgments towards that person.
Right.
Well, that judgment is something that we either haven't owned within us
Yeah.
or that we're running from, or we don't like within that person that we ultimately don't like about ourselves. And there's more complexity and nuance to that as well.
Light
But this is where effort is required. This is where, as people and individuals and in a relationship, we have to put effort for it to change. And in terms of creating novelty and variety, we've got to get creative with that because that's what, when we're talking about sexual attraction, we're talking about that excitement, that spark, but we're also talking about intimacy, connection, and trust.
Right.
You've got to trust someone to really be able to be open with someone at some level, even if it's a casual encounter or a one night stand up. There's got to be a level of minimum level of trust that you have. If there's not a minimum level of trust, then you're pretty disassociated. That's the alternative. You get what I'm saying? Like you're disconnected from your body, you're shut down, and you're in the sort of physical senses without really being in the body. Though it's a paradox.
There's a mental connection, which I think is important.
Very
as well.
little. Yeah.
You hear the comments. I mean, they make shows about this because so many men and women talk about it. Like, oh, I lost my attraction towards my partner, or like, no, I like sex, but I just don't like it with her or him. It tends to die down. How do you keep that up? How do you keep it alive, in your relationship? Because you could love that person. That person could be still your partner, but that's a very crucial part of your relationship, I think.
Yeah.
The intimacy, the physical intimacy.
Yeah, and so the thing is, sexual intimacy and physical intimacy can be very different, or at least different. They don't be very different, but they can be different, right? Meaning that, yes, it is a crucial part, and there are seasons and stages in every relationship, right? And so back to the point of, if this is important to you, then you've got to put effort in. Maybe you, just like you make date nights, you create once, twice, 3 times a week, whatever, once a month, whatever it is. It's making love or having sex. Absolutely, yeah. And people are a little bit apprehensive. They can be apprehensive with that and say, well, that's scheduling in. It feels robotic. Maybe, but that's another way to look at it is that's the masculine structure.
Yeah.
And how you bond, connect, and are intimate in that masculine structure is the feminine flow of things. And that's it can be a beautiful interaction. And then you're creating new patterns of behavior. But the other part to that is as well, is at some level, we've got to also be okay with attraction moving and fluxing. And we can also look at—
that's okay.
It can be okay, yeah. And we look at, okay, what are we making it mean? And how are we continuing to connect intimately outside of sexuality, outside of sexual interaction, right? So in other words, are we massaging each other? Are we going on long walks on the beach? Are we going to an art gallery and really observing beautiful art and sharing a powerful experience? Like what other forms of, because there are many forms of intimacy.
Yeah.
Are you bringing it into your life to maintain connection? That then acts as foundations and building blocks for sexual intimacy, which is generally more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a really, really good point, actually. What is your opinion on marriage in 2024?
Good for some, not good for others. I mean,
Really?
yeah. I mean, I'm not against the. I'm against the.
Considering the rates and the rate.
Well, I mean, yeah, we can speak. We can speak to that. But here's the thing, though. Like the foundation of that is corrupt and broken. So institutionalized marriage, from the perception of an economic arrangement, I don't believe in.
No,
Right?
Yeah. But do you think we need that if a couple is in love and they want to be together? Do you think they need that to sort of solidify or
You don't
stamp
no,
on it?
You don't need a certificate from the state to tell you you're married. Like,
Right.
pardon my French, but fuck that.
Yeah.
Like that to me, that's just autocratic. You don't
Right.
need that. It's a shade and affliction of autocracy.
Yeah.
Having a ceremony
Yeah.
celebrating your union,
Right.
either by yourselves
Yeah.
or with people that you care about to witness you,
Yeah.
that's a different conversation.
Yes.
That's beautiful. That's that's symbology.
Yeah.
Symbology matters. It's the oldest language we have access to.
Yeah.
Now you're speaking a language of love when you're creating symbols like that, and you can create it however you want. Whatever is in alignment for you as a couple that represents your union, your commitment to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because I feel like sometimes I think about, it's like, is marriage becoming obsolete nowadays? Because, but it's the idea of what you make them, like if you decide to be with each other, you don't necessarily need the certificate to prove.
No, it's gonna no.
My parents might disagree with that, but it depends on today's day and age and older generations.
You know, today's day and age as well, because you asked in 2024. So let's break down 2024, at least in the Western world. I mean, not even the Western world, because there's nuances to that. Let's say in the US, right?
Yeah.
We live in a fairly entitled society. We live in a quick fix society. You got a headache, take a pill. You don't feel well, take this tablet that will suppress your whatever it may. Like we're looking for quick fixes.
Yeah.
Where we see something we don't like, we're out. Like we don't put effort in. I'm generalizing now. Okay? I'm totally
Yeah,
generalizing.
the culture, today's culture.
Yeah, and so it may pay for us to be a little more deliberate and intentional with how we do life, our lives, and how we interact with other people. And having a little staying power during difficult situations builds a little character. Yeah.
Yeah, because a lot of people, quitters.
Yeah, we have a fear of commitment.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll just go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah. It's like because you're always swiping on your phone, it feels like you can just do that in life, but it doesn't.
Parallel. There are parallels there. That's right. It's not always the case.
What would you say is like your number one core value or like your guiding principle, especially? Well, I would start with the romantic relationship that you try to implement in your romantic relationship always, and relationships in general. But
Growth. And so for me, growth is synonymous with expansion, even love as well. And so I want to be, it's a loaded word. Growth is, for me, it's a loaded word because it means that if I value growth in a relationship, it means that I have to bring forward better versions of myself. I have to do my inner work. I have to take ownership of behavior that maybe is not pleasant. I have to take ownership of my reactivity. Like I'll give you an example just to be transparent. I can have a propensity to be reactive. I can be abrasive. I can be rude. I can be loud. I can be aggressive. I grew up with this.
and you know that about
Oh,
yourself.
absolutely. And I still play it out sometimes, but it pays for me to step back in humility, take ownership, apologize, own it. And even better than that is actually have greater mastery over it in the moment. And that's deeper inner child work. Ultimately, that's working with the parts of my nervous system that still feel threatened in certain environments that believe they have to be that in order to have control, because I had so little control growing up. You can imagine, and maybe you've experienced this, I don't know, but for me as a little boy, if my dad was hitting me, I'd be pissing myself. I'd be urinating myself because I was so scared, and then in anticipation, if I heard him be loud, I would urinate myself. There's a little, 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old boy.
Yeah.
And so as an adult,
Yeah.
well, I'm big and strong now
Yeah.
and I'm pretty dangerous. I don't need to take that anymore.
Yeah.
So, and then I grew up in Australia as well, drinking, fighting. That's all you do every weekend. You just drink and fight. That's Australian culture. Like
Really?
it's English culture, just
Right.
go to the pub, go to the bar, drink,
Oh, like
make sure-
fighting in the bar, not professionally, you mean?
Yeah, but fighting in the bar. Yeah, yeah,
To a
yeah.
UFC champion here?
No, I'm not very far from a UFC champion. But that type of thing, that was the culture we grew up in. But all of that is just suppression. All of that is just oppressing self, right? Like it's being so angry at my dad and so angry at life that but I'm not dealing with it, so I'm just going to take it out on alcohol and other people. And,
Right.
but that's very common in that culture.
Yeah.
And so my point in saying that is it's very important that we take, like when you go back to the question of like why is growth so important to me? Because I don't want those behaviors leaking out in relationship. That's not healthy for me because all it is perpetuating a past version of myself. So I'm never really outgrowing that.
Yeah.
And so growth is really important for me in a relationship. It's a long way of saying why growth is important.
I do have actually one more question. As an individual, like, even at this point in your adulthood, when you are self-aware, we're not perfect. Things happen. Life happens. It throws you off balance. When you get thrown off balance and when you have all those maybe anxiety, maybe depression, maybe negative thoughts, what's your sort of routine or strategy to bring yourself back to being centered again? Is there something you practice?
Yeah. So breath work and somatic practice is a big part of my own personal practice. And, I teach it like every month I have something called breath work for the feminine where it's live in person, live stream and recorded. And it's a 3-hour practice of somatic work, vulnerability practices, breath work, live coaching. Like I lean into those, what I teach, I lean into that for myself as well, big time. So if I feel, if I feel dysregulated, I will do my best to remove, because again, I can have a propensity when I'm in my shadow, I can be what Terry Real, who's a long-time family therapist, well known in my space, so to speak.
Yeah.
I'm boundaryless and one up, meaning I can, in my reactivity or in my shadow, I can have an unbridled self-expression. So that can be really daunting for some people. So let me pull back from that. Let me just create some space. Let me breathe. Let me work with that. Let me not project. Let me come into a different internal state.
Do you seek help or do you work on it by yourself?
Both. So depending on what it is, I'm going to work with it by myself. If I don't feel I'm shifting it enough, I'm going to go to my coach. I'm going to go to my therapist. I'm going to go to people that my teachers that support me.
Okay.
Simultaneously, I'm going to bring that to the men in my life that hold me accountable and challenge me and call me forward. I surround myself with healthy men that call me out of my bullshit because I can have a lot of it, right? So
what about your partner? Would you take it to?
Yes, great question. Yes, and depends. If we have an agreement where I can bring to her a raw expression, I'll do that, but I won't do that often because that can wear very thin on the feminine body. And when I say feminine body, I'm talking about the energetic, emotional, relational body and the nervous system.
With the woman's psychology, you're understanding her psyche. That's why you're like, I can only bring this much to the woman. That's
I've learned the hard way, my dear. I've learned the hard way.
Not everyone can understand that. They'll just dump a lot of stuff on you.
Yeah, and sometimes, again, I'm going to take ownership. Sometimes I will. Yeah. I don't want to, but it's that little boy in me that's like, I've got to get I've got to be seen, That's my insecurity, that's my wounded, that's my fragile masculinity coming out. Like that's not my go-to, that's not my foundation, but it lives in me. So I'm going to do my best to not bring that to my partner.
As much as possible.
Yeah. But I'm going to bring her truth, but it's not going to be so raw that it's too much for her. And if I bring her something that's raw, and this is in any relationship, by the way, in a friendship as well, ask permission, meaning, Shiva, I'm feeling a lot of stuff right now and I want to share with you. Are you open to receiving that?
Yeah.
And you'll say yes, no, maybe.
And of course you say you want your partner to be able to open up to you, right? Even if there is a limit, you still want them to feel better.
For sure.
But it's just that I feel like sometimes that might not be enough to open up to your partner, or sometimes there are things that you feel like they may not understand.
Yeah, or it's not for them to process and work through.
Yeah.
It's your stuff to work through. And that's one of the things that I'm learning a lot more about, because again, like one of my afflictions, I'll just make a connection, some people may relate to this, I didn't feel heard enough growing up. And so again, remember voids and values?
Yeah.
Now, as an adult, especially when I'm in my shadow, when I feel unstable within myself, I want to be heard. So what do you do when you want to be heard? You talk a lot. You get in people's faces, like you become intense.
Yeah.
That's we all have these shadows. I'm just at a point in my life right now, and it's been a long path to get here, where I choose to openly speak to it because I don't just want to put my best foot forward. I want to put all of myself forward because one, I believe that when we're vulnerable and real like that, people will feel safer in our presence, and then they can open up and we can all feel safer.
Yeah.
But also it's a practice of, leading by example, but also not being ashamed of all parts of self,
But it is important, though, like you said, the inner work, the breath work, the meditation, when you're trying to get rid of negative thoughts and depression or anxiety, to also have that social circle of men or therapists that you said. It's important to also communicate with them and open up, to seek help.
Be
basically.
witnessed. Yes, seek help, be witnessed
'Cause a lot
in
of
your
us don't do
vulnerability.
that. I mean, I know I
shut down.
personally 90% of the time close off, until I'm good again to come back to the world. I'm not saying it's the right way, but I do that a lot more than seeking help.
Yeah. And that can serve a purpose, right?
Right.
And
It could serve as an inner work as well, in a way.
depends how it's done.
I'm not saying I'm not cutting my wrist close enough.
Which is great. Yeah, which is fantastic that you're not. Yes.
Meditating or
And-
solitude.
But it also perpetuates, if you don't mind me saying, it also perpetuates a belief that you have that you're better off on your own. I'm not saying that you should be with someone or that you should be on your own. I'm not saying any of that. You've got to choose, but you just got to identify where the choice is coming from. So if you're taking that action, not being vulnerable and real, if you're not doing it when you're not in intimate relationship where there's higher risk, then it's going to be way more difficult to do it in an intimate relationship where there's a higher risk. So when that person feels that lack of vulnerability or lack of openness, that's where each other's reactivity starts to compound, and you start reacting and relating from an inner child or an adaptive or wounded child place as opposed to a healthy adult,
I see.
which is probably a whole other podcast.
Yeah, I know. Do we have another hour? No.
I do.
So I'll tell you before we wrap up. Actually, I will tell you a little bit about this, these symbols. So basically, I had a lot of time during the pandemic. No, but it's basically what I practice every day. So my name is all symbolized. So the S is journey, as in your life is a journey and not a destination, and that's how I see it. And I learned, and I'm still learning, to embrace every moment. And I've gotten to places where I would be at a destination. It's like, now what, So I'm really trying to enjoy the journey. And the H, it looks like a ladder or stepping stones because I don't like to look at challenges as obstacles. I feel like they're all learning curves and stepping stones. So I made it. Obviously, the I is obvious what it is, but it's basically like gratitude and being centered and bringing yourself back to that centeredness, even when no matter what life throws at you. And that the V is actually wings to keep thriving, to spread your wings and fly. And one of my core values is the last one, is to lead with love.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Fitting.
Is there anything that you'd like to share, and what's the best way for people who seek your programs or help or whatnot to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you for asking. StefanosSafandos.com, everything's there. If you want to work with me, coachwithsteph.com, and my social media channels at Stefanos Safandos. And I'm pretty active on Instagram.
You're pretty active on Instagram. Yeah. And there's in-person and virtual workshops?
Correct.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Yeah.